My name is Amelia, but everyone calls me Amy. At 22, with student loans breathing down my neck and an eviction notice taped to my apartment door, desperation was my closest companion. My world was a landscape of gray city concrete and the bitter taste of instant coffee. So, when I saw the classified ad, tucked between listings for used cars and yard sales, it felt like a sliver of light. It was simple, almost cryptic. Governess and housekeeper needed for 2 young children. Live-in position. Generous compensation. Apply in person. The address was for Hawthorne Manor, a name that whispered of old money and sprawling, forgotten gardens. There was an undercurrent of urgency in the stark black print, a sense of a void that needed to be filled by more than just a hired hand. The day I arrived, a nervous energy buzzed under my skin. Hawthorne Manor wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of sorrow built from dark stone and ivy. Towering iron gates, wrought into the shapes of weeping willows, groaned open as I approached. The windows were like vacant eyes, reflecting the overcast sky without a hint of life within. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the heavy brass doorbell, its chime echoing into a profound silence that seemed to swallow the sound whole. The door swung inward, revealing a man who seemed to be a part of the manor's architecture. He was tall, with shoulders burdened by an invisible weight, and his dark eyes were shadowed with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, yet he looked rumpled, as if he'd slept in it for a week. There was no warmth in his expression, no welcoming smile. "You're here about the position?" he asked, his voice a low, flat monotone that held no inflection. A chill, unrelated to the damp air, traced its way down my spine. "Yes, sir, I'm Amelia," I managed, my voice smaller than I intended. "I'm Mr. Sterling, Alexander Sterling," he replied, his gaze sweeping over me with a detached clinical assessment. He stepped aside, a silent invitation into the cavernous maw of the house. As I stepped onto the polished marble floor, the silence was the first thing that truly struck me. It was absolute. In a house with 2 children, I expected the distant clamor of toys or the echo of laughter, but there was nothing. Only the click of my own sensible shoes against the stone. The walls of the grand foyer were lined with faded portraits, dominated by the image of a woman with an ethereal, tragic beauty. In every painting, her expression was the same. A regal, unsmiling melancholy, like a queen presiding over a fallen kingdom. I felt her eyes following me. A faint scuttling sound from the top of the grand staircase drew my attention, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The entire manor felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter the stillness. It was then I realized this job would be far more demanding than I had ever imagined. When I was finally introduced to the children, 7-year-old twins, the house's oppressive sadness took on a tangible form. Leo and Clara were not just quiet, they were unnervingly still. They sat on a large Persian rug, not playing, but simply existing, watching me with wide, cautious eyes that held the gravity of old souls. They looked like porcelain dolls, beautiful and fragile and utterly silent. "This is Amelia," Alexander said, his voice doing little to break the tension. The children offered no response, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Their silence was a wall, and in that moment, I understood my purpose here wasn't merely to clean floors and cook meals. It was to wage a war against the silence, to coax life back into a place that had long since forgotten its sound. My eyes drifted down the long, shadowed hallway to a single, imposing oak door at the very end. It was closed, and something about its stark finality made me both curious and deeply afraid. I knew, without knowing why, that the heart of this family's sorrow lay behind it. My new life was a structured routine inside a timeless void. I inhabited a small, Spartan room in the East Wing, a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded me. My days were a blur of dusting ornate furniture, preparing meals that were often left untouched, and caring for the 2 small ghosts who drifted through the halls. Leo and Clara missed their mother, Eleanor, with a grief so profound that it had stolen their voices. Alexander Sterling remained a phantom himself. He was a man buried in his work, a recluse in his own home. He took his meals alone in his study and spoke only when absolutely necessary. His words always clipped and practical. The manor was his tomb, and he was its willing prisoner. One dreary evening, tasked with clearing out some old boxes, I found myself in the dusty, forgotten attic. Sunlight struggled through a single grimy porthole window, illuminating dancing dust motes. Tucked away in a heavy cedar chest, I found it, a small, leather-bound box. Inside, held together by a faded ribbon, were bundles of letters and a diary. Eleanor's diary. With a trembling heart, I began to read. Her elegant script painted a portrait of suffocating loneliness. She wrote of a husband who loved her, yes, but who had sealed his heart behind the walls of his ambition. She described her isolation in the grand empty rooms, her love for her children a fierce, desperate flame in the darkness. Alexander provides a palace, one entry read, but I yearned for a home. He loves our children, I see it in the rare moments he looks at them, but it's a love spoken in silence. I saw then that Alexander wasn't cold, he was broken, a man who had lost the language of emotion. Tucked at the very bottom of the box was one last letter, its envelope sealed with wax. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Some secrets felt too sacred to disturb. Slowly, like the first tentative shoots after a long winter, I began to see small changes. One evening, I heard a sound I never thought I'd hear in that house: laughter. Peeking into the playroom, I saw Leo and Clara on the floor, drawing with crayons, their shoulders shaking with soft giggles. In the doorway, leaning against the frame, stood Alexander. He was watching them, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. "They haven't laughed like that in a very long time," he murmured, his voice so close it made my heart jump. It was the first time he had spoken to me about anything other than my duties. A week later, a sharp, unwelcome presence pierced the manor's gloom. A woman, impeccably dressed and radiating an icy disapproval, introduced herself as Claire, Eleanor's sister. From the moment she saw me, her eyes were filled with suspicion. She watched my every move, her critiques like tiny, stinging needles. "You're far too familiar with them," she'd say, watching me play a board game with the twins. "They require discipline, not a playmate." Later, she cornered me in the kitchen as I was scrubbing a pot. "Do you honestly believe you can just waltz in here and take my sister's place?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Of course not," I stammered. "I'm just the governess." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Let me tell you a little secret, little governess. This perfect family you think you're saving, it was a sham. Alexander was never the husband my sister deserved. He's a cold, unfeeling man who starved her of affection. Don't fool yourself into thinking you can make him happy. He is incapable of love." Her words were a physical blow, winding me. Could it be true? Was I just a fool, trying to warm a heart made of stone? Claire's visits became a regular form of torture. She made it her mission to undermine me, to make me feel like an insignificant intruder. One afternoon, in front of Alexander, she declared, "The children need a mother figure, Alexander, a real one, not some girl who thinks she can fix a family with fairy tales." Shame washed over me, hot and suffocating. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But then Alexander spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Amelia is good for my children," he said, his gaze meeting mine for a fleeting second. "She makes them happy. For now, that is more than enough." I was stunned. It wasn't the words of a boss defending an employee. It was something more. My heart, which had been cowering in my chest, began to beat a little faster, a little stronger. In the weeks that followed, the ice around Alexander began to thaw. One rainy evening, a domestic disaster struck when Leo knocked an entire jar of bright blue paint onto the white kitchen tiles. Instead of panicking, I found myself laughing at the absurd, vibrant mess. And then I heard it, a soft, rusty sound. Alexander was laughing too. "You have a way of making things better," he said, his eyes holding mine as we knelt to clean up the paint. A current of warmth passed between us, more potent than anything I'd ever felt. The true miracle happened a few nights later. As I was tucking the children into bed, Clara handed me a crayon drawing. It depicted a smiling man and a smiling woman holding hands with two smiling children under a bright yellow sun. My eyes welled with tears. They were showing me, in the only way they knew how, that I was part of their picture. As I read them a bedtime story, I saw Alexander standing in the doorway, a silent observer. When the story was over, Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest. "Amy, will you stay with us forever?" he whispered. My heart felt like it would burst. "Of course, Leo," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." Then Clara, the girl who had not uttered a single word since I arrived, turned her gaze to her father. In a tiny, clear voice, she said, "Daddy, smile." Alexander froze, his composure shattering like glass. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt by her bed, his hand trembling as he brushed a stray hair from her forehead. "I will, my darling," he choked out, tears glistening in his own eyes. "I'll smile because of you and because of Amy." He pulled both children into a hug, and I joined them, the 4 of us a small island of warmth and light in the vast, dark house. For the first time, it didn't feel like a manor or a mansion. It felt like a home. Later that night, a soft knock came at my door. It was Alexander. He looked nervous, stripped of his usual stoic armor, but his eyes shone with a new light, hope. "You're a miracle, Amelia," he said softly. He stepped closer, and before I could process what was happening, he leaned in and kissed me. It was a gentle, hesitant kiss, full of unspoken grief and burgeoning hope. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it took flight. The next morning, the spell was broken by Claire, who burst in unannounced. She saw Alexander in the kitchen, and she saw the way he smiled at me as he handed me a cup of coffee. Her face twisted into a mask of fury. "What is going on here?" she demanded. "What have you done to him?" To me, she hissed. "I warned you. You think you can seduce a grieving man and steal my sister's life? You're nothing but a conniving gold digger." The accusation hit its mark. She was right. This was Eleanor's house. These were her children. This was her husband. I didn't belong. "I'm so sorry, Alexander," I cried, turning to flee. "I'll pack my bags." I was throwing clothes into my suitcase when the door opened. It was Alexander. "Don't listen to her, Amy," he said, his voice urgent. "The only thing wrong with my life was the emptiness before you came." He gently guided me to sit on the bed. My marriage to Eleanor, it wasn't what it seemed. We were 2 deeply lonely people rattling around in this cavernous house. When she passed, the world went silent. And then you came. You brought laughter and color and life back into these walls. You made me feel alive again. That kiss was not a mistake. My only mistake was waiting this long to tell you how I feel. Amelia, I'm falling in love with you. Please don't leave. Stay, and let's build a real family together. 6 months flew by. The silence of Hawthorne Manor was replaced by a symphony of life, the sound of children's laughter echoing in the halls, music playing in the evenings, the murmur of happy conversation. Claire no longer visited. My small room in the East Wing was now a guest room. I shared the master suite with Alexander. The haunted man I had first met was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes shone with love and contentment. I still passed by that closed oak door at the end of the hall, the one that housed Eleanor's belongings. I never opened it. The sealed letter remains in its box in the attic, its secrets kept. Some memories, I've learned, are not meant to be disturbed. The past is a foundation, not a residence. One sunny afternoon, as we watched Leo and Clara chase butterflies in the garden, Alexander took my hand. "Are you happy, Amy?" he asked, his voice soft. I looked at the beautiful home around me, at the vibrant children I loved as my own, and at the incredible man by my side. "Yes," I said, my heart full to bursting. More than I ever dreamed was possible. I came to Hawthorne Manor as a governess, looking for a job. Soon, I would be Alexander's wife. I had discovered that love, true and profound, can bloom in the most broken of soils, and that a little kindness and a lot of patience can heal even the most shattered of hearts. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing for more content.